The Kerry man, Tom Crean, has to be one of the most remarkable people in Irish history. Now, if you've never heard his story, you're going to love this video, and if you're a fan of Tom Crean, you'll definitely enjoy it as well. So, Tom Crean became famous as an explorer of the Antarctic, but in those journeys attempting to reach the South Pole, Crean would become famous for remarkable endurance and how he saved fellow members of one of the exploration journeys. Now, I interviewed a man called Michael Smith who's written a book about Tom Crean. I've got a link to that beneath this video. But Michael explained Tom Crean's life to me, and we started in the best place, back at the very beginning. And Michael explained Tom Crean's early life and how he was born in rural Kerry in a setting that would be hard to imagine he'd end up being world famous as an Antarctic explorer.
Tom Crean's story really starts in the late Victorian era in 1877, and he's born out in West Kerry on a farm, and he was a middle son of a very large family, 9, 10 children. He wasn't really going to inherit the farm. There was no real work. His education would have been minimal. And at the age of 15, 16, he did what so many thousands of other young Irish lads did in that era. He left home, and in his case, he joined the Navy.
Now, to fully appreciate Tom Crean's story, Michael explained the wider context of the world he was growing up in and how this was an age of exploration.
This is essentially the Victorian Edwardian era, is an age of exploration. The whole world was exploring. Anywhere where there wasn't a flag, countries, Germany, France, America, Britain, they sent expeditions to claim the land.
As I've already said, and many of you will know this, Tom Crean became world famous as an Antarctic explorer. But he actually got his break in these journeys of exploration somewhat by accident. So a famous explorer of the time, a guy called Robert Scott, was preparing to go to the Antarctic, but a sailor on his crew got in a fight and basically did a legger and ran off, and Tom Crean, just by this chance, was able to take his place, and this is how he got on to what would be the first of 3 expeditions attempting to reach the South Pole.
And so there, on the brink of this momentous expedition, Scott was a man short, and this scrawny young lad from Kerry put his hand up and said, "I'll go instead." And so that's where you have the very beginnings of Tom Crean as an Antarctic explorer, as a stroke of luck. I don't think he had any great desires to go. Somebody said to him, "You must be mad." And he said, "Well, I must be mad to have come this far away around the world." So this was the sort of character he was.
In all, Tom Crean would participate in 3 Antarctic expeditions, but it was the third one which brought him to global attention, and I think it's why he's remembered today. So that expedition to the Antarctic faltered. It actually ended up being a bit of a disaster. The ship that they'd gone in actually sank, and they needed to send basically for help and to get a rescue party to come and rescue the crew. And they selected 3 men from the crew to go and get help, and this was an extraordinary journey. It involved traveling over 1,500 kilometers to a place called Elephant Island, and then they had to cross this island. But Tom Crean was one of the people selected for this, and Michael explains some of the extraordinary feats that Tom Crean endured and carried out in order to rescue the other people from the expedition. This is extraordinary stuff from a guy who was born in Kerry back in the 19th century.
Tom was the only one who was what you would call fully fit. Amongst other things, they got lost, and Evans broke down, suffering very badly from scurvy. And he ordered Tom and Bill Lashley to leave him behind to save themselves. Well, they refused. And so they put him on the sledge as well and carried him, even though they were exhausted and probably eating maybe a third to a half of the food intake they needed. And they marched and marched and marched. And eventually they got to within 35 miles, that's about 55K, from base camp. And Evans, by this point, is on the brink of death. Bill Lashley is totally played out, and Tom volunteers to walk the last 35 miles, 50 odd kilometers, on his own. Crucially, he doesn't take a sleeping bag, he doesn't take a tent, he doesn't take a stove to make a hot drink, and the only food he's got are a couple of biscuits and some sticks of chocolate. He's already walked 1,500 miles in 4 months. He's exhausted and very, very hungry.
Now, I don't think I'm giving the story away by saying Tom Crean survived, it's what made him famous, but it's his reaction after he completes this trek of 36 kilometres on his own, which is really incredible and kind of says so much about the man. Michael explains it for you here. It's just remarkable stuff.
In 18 hours, he walks the last 35 miles, stumbles into the hut, passes out with exhaustion, is revived by a tot of brandy, which is what doctors used to do in those days, and is promptly sick all over the poor old doctor. And he then volunteers to go back out and rescue his dying comrades. Fortunately, the doctor had a team of dogs and didn't. Tom was sent to bed with a bowl of porridge.
Now, Tom Crean's life after these Antarctic expeditions was something of an anticlimax, I suppose you might say. He moved back to Kerry in the midst of the Irish War of Independence, and his life was actually initially beset by a personal tragedy. His brother, who was a serving policeman at the time, was shot dead a few weeks after he returned back. And after this, Tom Crean decided not really to share his story. Remarkably, he never gave an interview. Michael now explains the later phase of his life, which, as I say, compared to his earlier years, was somewhat anticlimactic.
So he comes back, having been away for 27 years. When you think about that in any lifetime, that's an awfully large chunk out of somebody's life. He comes back and finds the country is in rebellion. Within a month of him coming back, his brother, who's a sergeant in the RIC, is shot dead in Cork, and he therefore takes this quite monumental decision not to speak about his exploits. And the importance of this is that Tom Crean never gave a single interview to anybody in his life. He never wrote down anything because he wasn't educated particularly. And he opened a pub, which is still there, the South Pole Inn in Alascore. And people used to come in the 20s and 30s to see the famous Tom Crean, who'd been with Scott and Shackleton. And he would just, excuse the pun, but he would melt into the background.
I think you'll agree, it's an absolutely phenomenal, incredible story. Now, if you want to find out more, as I said, I've got links to Michael's book beneath this video. I also have links to a much longer interview I did with Michael in podcast format. That's linked there as well. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell to get the next installment of Irish History when it comes out.